Nice to see you all. It's Hayley Hughes here, the Ink Scholar, and I'm here with another one of my CPD conversations. So we've got the fabulous Mary Hind-Portley with us this evening. Now, you'll know Mary from doing so many CPD sessions for Lit Drive. It's unbelievable. So there isn't really anything that Mary doesn't know about English. So I'm so excited to have her here with us tonight. So what are we going to talk about tonight, Mary?
We said we would talk about A Christmas Carol and some of the misconceptions that arise around reading it. And my particular take on it as well is religion. But we can discuss a whole raft of different misconceptions.
Okay, brill. Now, I haven't been teaching A Christmas Carol long, weirdly, because we actually taught Jekyll and Hyde for a long time, and then we changed to A Christmas Carol, partly because I think it's much easier for the kids to access.
I would agree with you.
Yeah, and also as well because Stuart Price did some awesome resources, which saved us a load of time that we then jiggled with.
God bless Stuart.
Oh, I know, the saviour of English.
He is.
So why do you think, Mary, that so many schools do A Christmas Carol? What is its appeal?
Well, I think it's got this universal appeal because it's a story that I think we kind of grow up with. You know, we know we've seen the Muppets, we love the Muppets, which actually I think is quite in many ways very faithful to the actual words in Christmas Carol, even though we do have some things that arise, like there are two Marleys and one is called Bob and a couple of other things. But I do think it's certainly one which I think people get a relationship with. And when the word Scrooge obviously is entered into the language to mean this miserly attitude. And one of the books that I really love, which I tell everybody to read, I'm just going to get it here, is this lovely book by Paul Davis. I'll just hold up the cover. And when I first got it and opened it, it's dedicated to Mary. So I thought, oh, maybe he's written it for me.
There you go.
Obviously he hasn't. But it's this one, The Lives and Times of Ebenezer Scrooge. It's a really, really good book to read. It's fantastic. I don't think it's one that's particularly well known, but I do tell everyone to read it. So that's a top tip. And he talks about it as a culture text, that it's pervasive, that it's everywhere and referred to. And there's been so many retellings of it and so many different films that I think it's part of our culture. So there's that. And I think it's also, the narrative is very straightforward on the surface, but there's lots of complexities below it. And what I like about it is I think it's very accessible for students to understand. They understand that Scrooge has to change and they can build a relationship with the Cratchit family, and they enjoy looking at how Scrooge changes. And I think there's a lot that students can access, whereas, as you say, with Jekyll and Hyde, the complexity of the telling of the story and some of the inaccuracies in the chronology of it, because of the way it was written so quickly, it does overcomplicate it for students.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head with the Muppets version as well. Then it seems to be something that we all grow up with, doesn't it? Almost knowing this story. So the fact that when the kids start studying it, they've got the plot more or less down pat is one less thing for us to worry about.
And that's really good, because then we can concentrate on the nuances of it and the deeper descriptions. But I think as well as that, there are some things that they do find hard to get their heads around. And I also think that perhaps sometimes the simplicity with staff, with teachers, is when we're very rushed and we've got lots and lots of text to prepare and to feel on top of, that it's very easy to perhaps bring some misreadings to it, which by deeper readings in that wider professional reading that we need to do around a text that we would have done at university, does sometimes take a backseat. And I think it's really important. But sessions like this, where you can talk it through with people, are really helpful, because it does help people in their very busy lives.
I think this is massively going to help me as well, to be honest, Mary, because as I said, I'm quite new to teaching it. So, you know, that book looks incredible. So I will.
It's really good. It's really easy to read as well. So one of the things that I read the book for was because I was writing for Lit Drive about religion in the text and what kind of religion is it a religious text? Because some people, I remember talking to somebody on Twitter who'd said that one of the people they worked with said it wasn't a religious text at all, that it was completely secular. And I disagree. I really disagree with that. So one of the first things I think is not really understanding what religious background Dickens had. And the reason we do that is because actually it wasn't that simple. He he created his own version of Christianity. So when you look at the theology and maybe the doctrine that seems to underpin A Christmas Carol, it's very easy to apply other sort of sectarian readings from different aspects of Christianity, whereas his was very simple, based on the idea of do good to all, and and as Valentine Cunningham says, New Testament light. So one of the first misconceptions I want to pick out is about the ghosts and the world they inhabit. So lots of people, because they think there's three ghosts, we look at the three, the past, present, and future yet to come, they align that with the Holy Trinity. Seen a number of readings of that, but what we have to understand is that Dickens wasn't a Catholic, and he despised the rise of Anglo-Catholicism in the Anglican Church, and he didn't have that doctrine at all. So, and then when we look at the world which Marley inhabits, and when we see outside the window in Stave 1, lots of people align that with purgatory. And again, that's a Catholic doctrinal belief, and Dickens didn't believe in it. He didn't believe in that. And I just want to direct people to the phrase at the very end where it's referred to as the invisible world, and the fact that the ghosts are trapped. They can't work their way out of it. They are condemned to live out the misdoings in that world. Whereas in purgatory, very old-fashioned Catholic belief was that you could pray for the souls to be out of purgatory and to move into heaven. For example, All Souls Day, and people would petition to get souls out of purgatory if they thought that someone's soul was there. So. And when we look at it, and we perhaps think of the trio of the ghosts of past, present, and yet to come, we tend to forget about Marley, that it's actually four ghosts.
Yeah.
And another great book, I've got a big pile of them here on my stool. And the other great book that I would recommend that everybody reads is The Seven Basic Plots. It's massive, but it's one of those ones where I read it. Well, I've not read all of it. I've read most of it, but it underpins so much of story in our cultures. So this blew my mind when I read this bit, and it was a little epiphany about Christmas Carol. So he talks about the significance of numbers, and he talks about the importance of three, and the number of stories we have with a three in it, and he talks about those. But then when he comes on to the number 4, a couple of pages later, he talks about the human imagination and the rule of three and the archetypal structure. But then he talks about the idea of there being 4, and 4 being the number of completion. So I find it really fascinating that I think if we talk to students about the 4, and we say that by the time he gets to the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, he's at the very end of his journey of completion. And then that leads me on to the difference between redemption and salvation.
So we were talking about Dickens' religion there. I remember reading something a while ago about the fact he was a Unitarian.
Yeah.
So, for those kind of teachers who are unsure of what that means, they did have these beliefs about this symbolism of the number 4, didn't they? About, like you said, it being this number of completion, of stability, of order. And I think one of the Unitarian beliefs that I read about was that nobody has a monopoly on all truth.
Yes,
or kind of ultimate proof of the truth of everything.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I keep referring to an essay by Valentine Cunningham, which is really, really interesting and very accessible. And it talks about Dickens' faith, and it says that, like many Victorians who wanted to find a different way that wasn't so doctrinally heavy, is they took refuge in Unitarianism and this idea of unity of them being one together, and that they aren't held back, but the doctrinal stuff, which I think many people struggle with in the Catholic Church, is just not present, because it's about their interpretation of the Bible. And I'm not an expert on Unitarianism, but it's really interesting. But I think it's really important that we understand it, and that he became interested in it after he'd been to America. Also, it's interesting that when he was in America, that they saw that they were anti-slavery as well. So when he came back in 1842, about a month later, he joined he joined a particular chapel, I think it was Thomas Madge's, and then a bit later on he bought a family pew in another, I think it was Essex Street chapel, and he was worshipping there. And then his sister Fanny eventually then, her and her husband became Baptists. So we can see that there is, when we talk about the beliefs in the novel, that's what we need to consider. We need to consider how Dickens' beliefs are manifested in that it is New Testament and it isn't some of the heavy doctrinal stuff that perhaps we've been led to believe. So that's the sort of the main thrust of the bit about religion, really.
Yeah, I think it's easy for us, isn't it, as teachers sometimes to see that number 3, and because of all the stuff we do with Macbeth about it being a subversion of the Holy Trinity, to just think, oh, that's what Dickens is doing. So I think that's really interesting, and it's something that quite a lot of teachers wouldn't have thought about, really.
Yeah, and I think it's only when I started to read 7 Basic Plots that the depth that goes into is incredible, and the shift it gave me in understanding the structure of novels and writing it was really powerful. But the number 4 certainly interested me, and I remember reading it, I was like, that's what it means in Christmas Carol, and I got quite excited.
Well,
so I'm glad I can
made
share it
me
with people.
quite excited, to be honest. I can't wait to share it with the rest of my department. So us geeky English teachers, eh?
I know we're a special club, aren't we?
We are. So what was the other thing, do you think, that one of the other things, misconception?
I think one of the misconceptions is about poverty in the novel, and we know obviously it's Dickens as a social critic, and it's Dickens wanting to draw attention to the plight of the poor. And I also find this because I chatted to some other colleagues about, what misconceptions do you see students bringing forth in essays, and one of it was about poverty, and particularly the Cratchits. And there's an idea, I think, that students come to that they're desperately poor. So and I had a chat about this with and also about Unitarianism with Matt Lynch. We all know Matt and how fabulous he is.
Legend.
So absolutely. So we started to look at the 15 shillings a week, and it's quite interesting. There's lots of conflicting ideas, but basically most of it is about that 15 shillings is not too bad a wage at this time. That they aren't the absolute poor, because as I point out to my students, they have a home.
Mm-hmm.
They have more than one room. Yes, they have to cook the Christmas pudding in the copper that they boil the washing in, and they need to take the goose to the bakers to be baked, like so many Victorians did. But they have a house. Yes, they are not incredibly rich, but they get by. What people have talked about is, that there are 7 children he has to look after, and there is aspects of poverty, but I think with the Victorians, the idea of the twice-turned dress and the threadbare coat and handing down his shirt collars, I think a lot of Victorians would be used to living a life like that. And I also then take the students back to the beginning where he talks about the destitute and talk about the poor law and the workhouses. And Bob isn't there. He's not destitute. That 15 shillings, some people think is quite a good wage for that time, and then some people think it's quite a low wage. But we also have to consider, I think, that what I read about was inflation as the 1800s progressed. But I also teach the students about the 1840s when Dickens started to write, about being the hungry 40s. And although they have what we emphasize the smallness of the meal, they don't go hungry. And I think that's really important for us to think about. And the other thing that I think we don't make enough of is how sentimentalized that portrayal of the family is. I don't know what you think about that, but I find it very interesting that it seemed to be they have love, and I say to the children, our students, they're emotionally rich, even if they're not financially as rich as they could be. But I think Dickens sometimes labours that at the expense of maybe some aspects of the struggle that they might have.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. They're kind of described in a quite schmaltzy way, really, in some respects.
Yeah, it's this idea of and again, I go back to Valentine Cunningham, the carol philosophy, that Christmas makes everything better. And then I also go back with the students to the preface, where he does talk about, and there's one edition of the book, quite a popular one, that schools use, doesn't have the preface in, and I think that's a big mistake. And I go back to this ghostly little book. There is the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humour with themselves, with each other, or with the season. So this is a kind of very gentle alert to some of the poverty in that he sees and witnesses. But I think there are works which are much more sharply critical and bring poverty right in front of us that Dickens has written. But this is not that book. It shows us the charity gentleman, but it shows us a family who have love. I think it's only when we see that quite terrifying reveal, as they would say nowadays, of ignorance and want, that we start to really sort of think about the level of poverty below that, the destitute. We see the workers warming their hands around the brazier at the beginning, but real true poverty doesn't impinge on us in this, because it is about the sentimentality of Christmas. And as I said, this idea of carol philosophy, this phrase that Valentine Cunningham uses, and this idea of this sentimental approach, I think it's one worth discussing if students get a question on poverty.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And I think, when we're thinking, I know we don't teach for exams, but if we're thinking about the mark scheme, some thoughts like that really do take it into that conceptualized and perceptive way, without a doubt.
And I think when we talk about the mark scheme, it's something that never goes away, does it? It's in the background of our minds. But I think it's that like you said, we're not teaching to it. If we teach them the breadth, then we teach them for the philosophy and the context of when it was written and what Dickens' life was. It does raise their experiences, and they come with a much more nuanced approach to the text at whatever level they might be starting from. And I'm really passionate about that we should never ever deny that knowledge and that conceptualized approach to a text for students.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't be doing with kind of dumbing down and putting glass ceilings, on
not at all.
Bottom sets or whatever
exactly.
You might call them. So yeah, I tend to teach the same for everybody, and then scaffold as needed, I think.
And I think those discussions that we have in departments are really, really important. Pitch high, think about what we would want. I always think, what would I want my child to be able to access, but how do I get them there? And a discussion about the scaffolding, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's what a lot of us are missing during these times are those professional discussions with colleagues in our department. And that's why I started this channel, really, to kind of carry that on and help people.
Yeah, because I'm lucky being a part of Lit Drive is that you do get, we do have that community in those conversations. We've talked about recently, we did the Inspector Calls CPD. And I watched Dr. Melissa Boyd's about the context for Priestley. And I do think that if we're teaching both of those texts in a curriculum, we need to align our teaching, and we need to really explore, well, when was Priestley writing? What influenced him? What's significant to the time period? And how do we apply that to Dickens? And I see lots and lots of crossovers between the two novels, the religion and, sorry, not two novels, the play and the novel, but lots of crossovers: time, social responsibility, poverty, the important, the significance of the working classes and capitalism. And if we make those rich conceptual connections with our students, they'll take that much more powerful schema into the exam with them.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of links on from some of Kat Howard's work on curriculum, really, that, and making sure that it's got that timeline, hasn't it, so that kids can make those rich connections.
Absolutely. And I think Kat's blogs and the book Symbiosis with Claire Hiller is really powerful. Really makes you think, about what's the story of curriculum. Well, along with Christine Council's excellent work, and Mary Myatt's as well, about the curriculum is a thing, the curriculum is narrative, and what story are we telling through our curriculum? Dickens does need to have a place, but we also, as we know, need a place for lots of other authors, so we're not just getting that dead white European male view of literature.
Yeah, those dead white guys that make up the GCSE spec, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, we need more not more vibrancy, but we need a much greater breadth of representation.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give kids that cultural capital that sometimes, they are lacking a little bit at home, and that's our job, really, to provide it, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about religion, we've talked about poverty, and how that might be a misconception. Is there anything else, do you think, that sometimes as teachers we might miss?
That's a really interesting question. So I gathered a list. I'm just looking here. So I think they were the really big things about it. Some little simple things that children might misunderstand. had the idea of the chestnuts, when they talk about putting the chestnuts on the fire, and these kids go, what? And I go, no, you cook them and you eat them. Why? Are they not coal? And no. So it's the tiny nuances of the customs that Dickens took for granted. That sometimes we have to go and research further, and some of the words and phrases that we use in there. There's also some people were discussing on Twitter about the theory that Scrooge is ill at the beginning because his lips are thin and blue. But I don't really take that, because I think that's just Dickens. I say just, but Dickens really emphasised that inner coldness and a lack of spirituality that he has. Because obviously, I think if someone was ill with a condition like that and then Marley's ghost appeared, I don't think they would survive that. So I think we have to be really careful and really nuanced in some of the aspects that we pick out.
Yeah, I think so. And I would read it the same as you did, really, because it comes in that long list of cold metaphors and imagery, doesn't it, about his external and internal appearance. Absolutely.
And tracing those motifs of warmth and cold throughout the novel, and how the novel is much warmer at the end than it is at the beginning. And I think the other one is thinking of ignorance and want as children, because it says the children, but we having to read beyond that they are the symbols of all the negative aspects of the Victorian hierarchy and capitalism. And I think it's really it aligns with Dickens' work on the ragged schools as well, and wanting to open education up for all. And it was really interesting because I was thinking about Blood Brothers, and I was thinking about Priestley, and then Diledem led me in the direction, when talking about Blood Brothers, of the Beveridge report. And I looked at the Beveridge report recently, and it has a list of things, and 2 of them are ignorance and want. And I think, how can we have come from Victorian era to the end of the Second World War and still be talking about ignorance and want? And I think those are 2 really powerful things that we can explore through our curriculum as narrative as well. And so for me, those are the sort of the main misconceptions. There's lots of tiny little ones we could look at, but those for me are the biggest things.
Yeah, and even past the Second World War, I think, for ignorance and want, if we're talking about Blood Brothers as well, we're talking kind of 1980s even. And
definitely.
Both of us are from the Northwest, where Blood Brothers was set, very close to one another, and that is the world I remember, to be honest.
Yeah, I think maybe teaching it now, we forget what it was like for those of us who didn't live through the 80s, and I did.
Same.
It's that the 80s was a very cruel time, and I live in Liverpool now, and I look at the changes that have been made in the city from desperate poverty, and there's not to say there isn't still desperate poverty when you look at some of the wards in Liverpool, but how far the city has come. I feel like there's a whole other discussion on Blood Brothers there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And one day.
I'd love to have you back, definitely, because it's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mary. I mean, I've learned so much from that, to be honest.
Thank
and it'll definitely change the way that I teach it as well. And sometimes I think you just kind of trying to do the best, aren't you, as a teacher, and you fall into those traps sometimes of
you do. And I do really want to emphasize that this is not a criticism of teachers at all, but it's a criticism of the time we have in school, and controversially, what we spend our CPD time on. For me, subject-specific CPD, where we teach one another, or we listen to expert videos like the Lit Drive materials, or other materials that people have put together, like this channel, that we spend that time, we have rich subject conversations, because it's through those that we learn much more about the text we teach. Other CPD is important, but I think we do have to consider time is very short, and workload as well. It's really important that we have people who can digest big, complex, wider reading for us, and then if we have the time, we can go away and search for it. So I've really appreciated thinking about this a bit more deeply with you, Hayley. So thanks very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching. So I'll be doing one of these videos sort of once a week, really, if I can fit it in amongst everything that we're all doing at the moment. So please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I've also got another channel as well, GCSE Literature Boost, where I have many academics from across the UK presenting mini lectures for your GCSE students. So do check out both of those. And thanks again, Mary.
Thank you very much, Hayley. See you soon.
Thank you.